الحمد لله رب العالمين له النعم وله الفضل وله الثناء الحسن صلوات الله البر الرحيم والملائكة المقربين على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه الطيبين الطاهرين ومن اتبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما، وأسأل الله أن يرزقنا حسن النية وحسن الختام. I praise Allah, I thank Allah for the endowments He has given us without Him being obligated to give us anything, and I ask Allah to raise the rank of our beloved Prophet Muhammad and to protect his Muslim nation from whatever he feared for it. May Allah give us the sincere intentions and the good ending. Inshallah, before we start, there were two questions that were sent to me regarding last week's lesson. The first question is, so if he said that men should marry women that they're inclined to, and that you should see her so that he'll be inclined towards her, what does that seeing her include? Okay, this is something that will come later in the book. There is a section specifically talking about men looking at women. What are they allowed to look at? And if it is for the purpose of marriage, what does the religion say about that? To answer the question in brief, if a man has not seen a woman before and he has made the determination to ask to marry her, so he has a friend, he knows that his friend has a daughter, he's never seen her before, but he has heard about her character, so forth and so on. He trusts his friend and he wants to ask to marry his friend's daughter, who he has not seen before. It is recommended for him to look at her before he asks to marry her. And what does he look at? He looks at her face and her hands, and not more than that. And by looking at her face, he would be able to gauge her beauty. And by looking at her hands, he would be able to gauge her health. Yani just look at the hands of someone who smokes. I think you'll understand that. It is not recommended for a man to walk into a place or come into the masjid now, for example, and he looks around to check out the women to decide which one he wants to talk to. This is not recommended. He doesn't do that. So we're only talking about the one who he has not seen before, yet he has made the intention to go and ask for her hand in marriage. Before he asked, the Prophet ﷺ recommended that he look at her first. Again, her face and her hands, of course, without desire. If he looks with desire, then this is haram. And there are other details. The second question is, if you should see her so you can be inclined towards her, but at the same time, you shouldn't be inclined towards her if she is a quote unquote 15 out of 10, what's the middle line? Uh, Beauty is subjective uh, to a certain extent. There are some people that their beauty is undeniable. Okay, so when we said that it is better for a man not to marry a woman who is exceptionally beautiful, and this is not exceptionally according to him, because the love that's in the heart of a person will exaggerate the beauty of the one that he loves. We're not talking about that. Just as if he hates her, it will decrease her beauty in his eyes, or vice versa. We're not talking about that. We're talking about someone who is exceptionally beautiful and it is undeniable whether the woman is loved or hated. That is the one that it is better for the man not to marry, and in general, of course. Uh, so he does not need to have a scale and look for the one who is average on that scale. No, because again, the beauty is subjective. Now we mentioned, and that's the answer to that question. We mentioned that for a man, for it to be recommended for him to get married, he would need to be in need of marriage, and yeah, meaning he would need the companionship of a woman, and he would be able to afford the expenses of marriage. As for the woman, if she needs marriage, it is recommended for her to get married. The expenses don't come into play for a woman because the woman is not obligated to support her husband, even if she is poor. And she is not obligated to support the children. Rather, that is the obligation of the husband. Yani, without going into further details. If the woman was occupying her time doing acts of worship, and when we say acts of worship, we don't mean she spends all of her time praying in seclusion or making dhikr, saying La ilaha illallah 25,000 times a day or something like this. That's an example. It could also be that she is engaged in acquiring the knowledge of the religion. She wants to be a scholar. So she spends her time studying and memorizing, which is an act of worship. So if she occupies her time with acts of worship and she does not need marriage, she does not need the companionship of a man and what that entails, then it is not recommended for her to get married. Because if she does, similar to the man, the marriage will pull her away from what she has been dedicated to, which is worship of Allah. She is going to get busy, just like the man, with the responsibilities that come with marriage. And as we said, the expenses of marriage do not apply. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Al-Isra, وَمَنْ أَرَادَ الْآخِرَةَ وَسَعَى لَهَا سَعْيَهَا وَهُوَ مُؤْمِنٌ فَأُولَئِكَ كَانَ سَعْيُهُم مَشْكُورًا. This means, and whoever desires the afterlife and strives for it, the striving that it deserves, while he is a believer, then those who are believers who strive for the hereafter, their striving shall be recognized and rewarded. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said in the hadith, أَفَلَا أَحَبُّ أَنْ أَكُونَ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا. Shall I not be a grateful slave? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, although he is the best of the prophets and the messengers, he used to spend long periods of time at night in worship, in prayer. So he would enter his room, he would enter the chamber of Aisha radiallahu anha. Then he would lie in the bed, and after lying in the bed, his body would touch the body of Aisha radiallahu anha, and then he would say to her, "Let me worship my Lord." So after lying down, he would say to her, "Let me get up and worship my Lord." So he would get up, he would perform wudu, and he would pray. And he would stand there in prayer. And the Prophet ﷺ, he would cry in the prayer until his beard was wet. And he would go down into ruku' and he would cry more. And he would prostrate and he would cry more until the ground would be wet with his tears. And Aisha, and even for a man, it is recommended to cry in the prayer and when reciting the Quran. And if one does not cry naturally, it is recommended to force yourself to cry. This is a good thing. It's not a bad thing, and it's not a sign of weakness. I'm sorry, you have a question? Yeah.
Okay. But going back, and there the conditions where a woman, if she's performing her acts of worship, what would be a condition where she would need to be married? If she's not married, she's performing her acts of worship. So what would be the condition where the need not to be married? And she thinks.
Okay, so here we weren't talking about a woman who's just doing her obligations. We're talking about a woman who is dedicated. She dedicated herself to worship. That is her profession, all the time worshiping Allah. So is that not what she was created for? Yes. So in her case, when she does not need to get married, she has no need for marriage. She does not have the sexual desire. for a man, then is it better for her to get married or not? This particular woman, the answer, it is better for her not to get married because it's going to distract her from her worship. But even if she is dedicated herself, even if she dedicated herself to worshiping Allah, but she has the desire for a man, she has a need. If she has a need, although she spends all of her time worshiping, it is recommended for her to get married. Okay. So the Messenger of Allah, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he would spend many nights like this in the prayer, worshiping Allah. And while his wife, Aisha, radiallahu anha, the wife that after Khadija he loved the most, and the wife who was among the best women that Allah has ever created, and the wife who was the most knowledgeable woman that Allah has ever created. That was Aisha. She was laying in the bed, and the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam would leave her bed to worship Allah. And she would ask him, why is this, O Messenger of Allah? Why is it that you are spending all of this time and effort doing acts of worship when any mistake, past or present, Allah has forgiven you? That doesn't mean the Prophet committed a lot of mistakes. No. But if he committed a mistake in the past, it would be forgiven. If he committed a mistake in the future, it would be forgiven. He's already achieved that victory and that high status to Allah. So why strive further when you've already made it? This is what she's asking. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he responded by saying, أَفَلَا أَكُونُ عَبْدًا شَكُورًا? Shall I not be a grateful slave? So it is incumbent upon us to follow the example of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and to embrace the acts of worship, the obligatory ones and the voluntary ones. Now, what is recommended in a wife? It is recommended that she be religious, meaning she has learned the religion and practiced it such that the attributes of righteousness is present in her. So she's not a sinful woman. And according to the hadith narrated by Al-Bukhari and Muslim and Abu Dawood and An-Nasa'i and Ibn Majah, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, تنكح المرأة لأربع لمالها ولجمالها ولحسبها ولدينها فاظفر بذات الدين تربت يداك. This means a woman is married for four things: for her wealth, her beauty, her lineage, which includes her social status, and her religion. Those four things. her wealth, her beauty, her status, her lineage, and her religion. فَاظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ. So choose the one who is religious. May your hands be rubbed in dirt. Taribat yadak. Literally, it means may your hands be dirty. So this hadith indicates that it is recommended for a woman whom a person wants to marry to be religious. And as we said, sometimes the Prophet ﷺ would use terms addressing women, but it is not exclusive to women. So it is not recommended for a woman to marry an enormous sinner among the men. She should go after a man who is religious as well, as will be made clear. So it's customary for the people, if a person wants to marry, to look at these four things: the wealth, the lineage, the beauty, and their standing in the religion. However, the Prophet ﷺ emphasized that the one who wants to marry should look for the religious one. He said, فَاظْفَرْ بِذَاتِ الدِّينِ تَرِبَتْ يَدَاكَ. So marry the one who is religious. May your hands be rubbed in dirt. So this last part of the hadith, it means you will be impoverished if you don't do it. And you will be enriched if you do it. You will be a winner if you do it. And you'll be a loser if you don't do it. Originally, this phrase, taribat yadak, may your hands fall into the dirt, or may your hands stick to the dirt. And that's the original meaning in the Arabic language. It's something that the Arabs, they used to say for someone who neglected something that they should have known or made a mistake. So they would say, taribak yadak. So originally, it's a reproach. It's a rebuke. But then the Arabs, they started to use it merely to draw one's attention to something. Don't neglect this. Don't be negligent about it. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying, pay attention, take heed, be warned, don't neglect it. Marry someone who is religious. So this is a strong encouragement from the Prophet ﷺ to marry someone who is religious. So it is a part of the Sunnah to seek a religious woman, and congratulations to the one who finds her. It's also recommended that the woman be a virgin, according to the authentic hadith narrated from Jabir ibn Abdullah radiyallahu anhuma, in which the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said to him, هَلَّا بِكْرًا تُلَاعِبُهَا وَتُلَاعِبُكَ, which means, why did you not marry a virgin? So you could, literally, he says, so you could play with her and she could play with you. Now, This is the default recommendation. Okay, so that does not mean if you don't marry a virgin that there is no reward in during the marriage contract or there's no reward in that relationship. No, it doesn't mean that at all. But by default, what is the default recommendation? To marry a woman who is a virgin. But there are other excuses to not do that. Uh, for example, an excuse would be the weakness of her and the difficulty to deflower her. That's an excuse. Okay. Or the need for someone to take care of his children. That's an excuse. So if a man married a woman who is not a virgin, but she is an older, experienced woman, because he needs help with his children, we don't say that what he did is contrary to what the Prophet ﷺ urged us to do. Because in this case, he has an excuse. But generally, marrying a virgin is better than marrying a non-virgin, generally. Jabir, radiallahu anhu, when the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, yani why did the Prophet say this to him? Because he married an older woman. And the Prophet asked him, why didn't you marry a young virgin? He told him because his parents died and he had young sisters. And he was concerned that if he married a young woman who was a virgin, then she would come between him and his sisters. So he chose an older one. And the Prophet ﷺ told him, you made the right decision. You made the right decision. So in that case, he did not do what was contrary to the recommendation of the Prophet ﷺ. It is also recommended that she be in or she be of good lineage, meaning a good origin, and of noble descent. As the Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith narrated by Ibn Majah, تَخَيَّرُوا لِنُطَفِكُمْ تَخَيَّرُوا لِنُطَفِكُمْ. Choose well for your offspring. Yani, so one is not recommended to marry a woman who is the child of zina, who is a child of zina. And it's not her fault. So this is not to blame the person whose parents fornicated, but by default, is it recommended to marry someone who is a bastard? The answer is no. Yani, and don't be. Sometimes people are offended by certain English words, don't be offended by that. Yani, that's the word. It's bastard, you know? And it's not the fault of the child. It is the fault of the parents, the biological parents. However, it is not disliked. So when we say it's not recommended, that means it's makruh, disliked. It's better not to do it. Unless someone marries her to protect her. So if the woman was the result of fornication, but the man married her to protect her, then it is not disliked. It is not disliked. So she may be a daughter of adultery, but she is religious. She's learned the religion and is pious. Yet, if she remains unmarried, it is feared that she may fall into corruption. Yet, fornication in, I don't want to just say America. It's not just America. When I went to the bush in West Africa, I found people in the bush fornicating. I found like girls, they come back to the village with babies because they went out and they fornicated. And it wasn't even hidden. It wasn't even, maybe she just got married and didn't tell anyone. No. So fornication is widespread, even among Muslims nowadays. And fornication has a negative effect on the society. It has a real negative effect. So, because a person over time can become corrupt, he may be in a good state at present, but then his desires or her desires become intense, leading the person to sin. So, if the man marries her, intending to protect her from the corruption of her state, if he does not find someone else, for example, to marry her, then it becomes recommended and rewardable. It's also recommended that the woman be fertile. And the fertility of a virgin is known by her relatives, by looking at her female relatives regarding the presence or the absence of children. And that is not by exposing her private parts. So you don't tell the woman, go to a OBGYN and let them check you out. And if they say you're fertile, or then you're good to go, he doesn't measure that by looking how wide her hips are. He doesn't do that. He looks at her female relatives. And it is recommended that the woman be affectionate, not grim-faced towards her husband. The Prophet ﷺ encouraged Muslims to marry affectionate women, meaning one who is affectionate and loving towards her husband. And she is a fertile virgin because, as we said, having children between spouses promotes affection. Okay, it's not an anchor. Children are not anchors. Children are an endowment upon Allah, by Allah to the husband and the wife, and it is a sign of their affection. And it promotes intimacy and love. One of the companions, Ma'qil ibn Yasar, radiyallahu an, he said, a man came to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam and said, I found a woman who is of good lineage and beauty, but she does not bear children. Should I marry her? The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said no. Then he came to him a second time, and the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said no. He forbade him, don't do it. Then he came to him, yani as a recommendation. Then he came to him a third time because he really wants to marry this woman. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said, تزوجوا الولود الودود فإني مكاثر بكم الأمم, which means marry the one who is loving and fertile, for I will boast of your numbers before the nations on the day of judgment. And that was narrated by Abu Dawood and An-Nasa'i. Yes.
And hearing of how do you apply those things, situations nowadays? Because you have women and men who already have children, who already have been married, and I know these are all recommendations, but you have men who have children, women who have children, women who are fertile but of a certain age and no longer desire to have any more children because of those conditions of their age, but yet they still want to do it. And all these are recommendations, but how do you apply those things to our situations today? And I'm going to self-disclose. I'm a woman of a certain age. I have children that are probably old enough to be some of the parents of some of the people who are sitting here, yet those recommendations don't apply. So how do I make those choices and think, or how would a male in that situation? He's of age, he has children, children are already grown. So what do we look at as criteria to apply to our lives when it comes to being married?
Okay, so as I said, what we mentioned are the default recommendations, and there are exceptions. Okay. First, let me be clear about something. When we're talking about whether it is recommended to marry this person or disliked to marry that person, you have two things. Okay. One is the contract, the marriage contract itself. This is one matter. The other matter is everything that comes after it. When we say something is disliked, okay, so we said that it is disliked to marry a bastard child by default. That means there is no reward if that judgment applies. There is no reward in conducting the marriage contract. When something is disliked, there's no reward in it. There's no sin, but there's also no reward. Okay? The contract would be disliked. But we are not saying that there would be no blessings that come within that marriage afterwards. The Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, he didn't say that. He didn't say that. Okay, those are two different things. Also, in many cases, for depending upon the individuals, this would not apply. In some cases, it would not be disliked to marry a woman who is infertile, or it would not be disliked to marry a woman who is not a virgin. She has been previously married. The Prophet ﷺ had many wives. How many of them were virgins? Aisha, radiallahu anha. So the Prophet ﷺ encouraged people to marry virgins, yet he only married one. Okay, so it depends on the circumstances. Okay, and by no means, just like we said, the woman who was exceptionally beautiful, don't go after that one because she could be trouble. Okay, either she's arrogant or she will attract trouble because people will talk about her. Okay, and what did we say? But don't worry about her and no one wanting to marry her. Of course, that won't be the case. Someone's going to want to marry her. Likewise, even if you have an older woman who has no interest in having more children, that does not mean no one should or would seek to marry her. No, not at all. Because, just because, and I'm not directing this to anyone here present or listening, okay? Just because someone is long in the tooth, and that's, yani, just because, oh, I'm sorry. Okay. It just because it means older, okay? And let me rephrase it. Experience. Okay, experience. Okay. So we need to show some respect. Okay. Experience. Just because a woman or a man is experienced, that doesn't mean they don't have needs. They're not dead yet. Okay. So the woman may be, even if the woman is postmenopausal, that doesn't mean she doesn't have needs. So she may need male companionship. A man may be 60, 70 years old and he needs female companionship. So he needs to get married. Okay. So it doesn't mean he should not look and no one should desire to marry him, or the more experienced sister should not look to get married because she has children, so she's not a virgin, or this and that. No, it doesn't mean that at all. Yani we said that one of the goals of marriage is to protect the chastity of the person. Chastity does not expire. Um, so we have maybe 10 minutes or so before Maghrib. So I'm trying to make it a point to stop close to 15 minutes before the prayer time, to ask and answer any questions. So if someone has a question, please ask.
Okay, the Muslim is moving, so I'm thinking maybe we should move the class to 6 p.m. If that's possible, what do you think?
Yeah, that's possible. We can move it to 6 p.m.
So, but sisters, I know they got more questions, and I don't think we're going to keep it. Want to tell them about the book?
Okay. Okay, one second. Yes, Fatima was not a direct cousin. She was a second cousin. I'm just answering a question
No, I'm
from
saying,
online.
is this session online?
Yes.
Or if it's online.
Yes, inshallah. You just need to get the link.
Okay.
Okay. As for the hadith we mentioned, there is more than one narration. One narration does not mention ahabbu, and some it does. Right. Does anyone? So if you have questions, now is the time.
Hi.
Walaikum assalam.
I think first from the um, her question is, then what do you do in a situation when you're married and the woman should be affectionate to her husband, and you're being affectionate to this man, and he is not receptive to this affection? So what do you do?
When you say he is not being receptive, does does that mean he does not respond to her calls to bed, or he does, but just in an unsatisfactory way to her? So that
And he was like what? Yeah, maybe not her fault. But just even just gentle affection, just gentle intimacy, like hug, kisses.
okay. So
Yeah, like it's like it goes like the children.
okay. All right. So I would suggest that she try talking to him first in a nice way, to let her feelings be known. Um, that may work, that may not work. Um, she can now what works for that particular man, it depends. For some men, for some people, what works for them is the religion. And this is one of the reasons why go after the one who is religious. Because the religious one, they're not going to ignore their religion. You point something out, they're going to accept it. Okay? So if pointing out that the way he is acting is contrary to what the Prophet ﷺ taught, then that may work. If that doesn't work, then maybe there is something else to motivate him. Maybe reward does not motivate him. Try threatening him. I don't mean with your wrath. I mean threaten him with the punishment of Allah. So if he's doing something in which he has exceeded the religious limits, so he's sinning, okay? If he's committing a sin, then advise him, and advice can include a carrot or a stick, as they say. So sometimes you need to remind a person to fear Allah that if you continue to do this, Allah may punish you. There's there's nothing wrong with the wife advising her husband with that. And a person should not be offended if someone tells you fear Allah. Someone should not be offended. Yani we need someone to remind us to fear Allah. That's normal. If you don't like that, then it means there's something wrong with you. Um, inshallah, although I mentioned that we were not going to go far into these types of things, after discussing with some people, they changed my mind. So there is a chapter in the book on intimacy. Yani according to what came in the religion. So these things are talked about as to how the husband should be towards his wife when being intimate. So if the sister has some trouble with her husband, maybe after we cover that chapter, she can use some of the material to help him. Uh, oh, okay. Yeah, the book is called The Clarification on Understanding the Essentials of Marriage. Yeah, I mean, and the one who put the book together is, yeah, I mean, no one important. Uh, okay, so someone asked a question. Yeah, for those who come in person, inshallah, next week. Um, okay. All right. Someone asked the recommendation where you had mentioned that the husband marries someone who is affectionate. If after being married, the husband sees that the wife is almost completely devoid of that is the affection towards her husband, where the husband no longer feels attracted to the wife. Would this be a grounds of divorce where it would not be disliked? I don't know. Or what are these matters because they are recommended that they are not taken into account, unlike the details of the wife who leaves out certain obligations? I don't understand the second question. You don't have to answer this question as I know certain topics will come. However, it would be if would you accept to answer this question, I would appreciate. Okay. So this question, I don't know the answer to the second question. If it's not recommended for the man to marry a non-virgin woman, then is it also ajib? I'm sorry, I'm just reading these questions. Is it also not recommended for the woman to not marry a non-virgin man? Okay, too many negatives. So the question should be, is it recommended for a woman to marry a non-virgin man? I I don't know. I need to review it. So the virgin and an affectionate woman and fertile. Yes. Where can one get the book? Inshallah, we will see. That's a good question. Okay. Are there any other questions? Yani the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he praised the women of Al-Ansar who did not let shyness prevent them from learning. The women from Al-Madinah used to be very direct and very blunt. They would ask about their menses to the Prophet in front of other men. They would ask about the sex drives of their husband to the Prophet. Okay, so if you have a question, ask. If if anything, write it down, um, send it to someone so it can make its way to Tariq, and then he'll send it to me. Okay? So if you don't want to ask in front of other people, have it sent to Tariq and he'll send it to me. Okay? The name of the book is Al-Idah في معرفة المهمات النكاح. Okay, the clarification on understanding the essentials of marriage. Okay. Yes. Wa alaikum assalam. Um, did everyone hear the question? The question is if it is recommended to marry a woman who is affectionate, how does the man determine that she is affectionate? Because he would not have been with her in private in order to see firsthand. So her personality would be known through her family. So one of the problems that we have in America is, or Western countries, we have the wrong type of individualism. Everyone does whatever they want. What the mother thinks, people don't care. What the father thinks, the uncles, the aunts, people don't care. The grandparents, doesn't matter. Traditionally, in traditional cultures, in Islamic culture, this should not be the case. The family comes with the girl. You are marrying into that family. Okay, the family of the husband comes with him. So if he wants to know what type of person she is and whether she will be affectionate or not in a permissible way, then he can consult her family. He can consult her family, her father, her mother, and he can speak to her about permissible things without being in private. He can do that, and then he will have an idea about those things. So people keep asking me about the book. Inshallah, before the next class, it will be available. والله سبحانه وتعالى أعلم وأحكم. And Allah knows best.